Okay, friends, I think we can start this event. Just few words from organizers of Lithuanian side. It's an honor. It's a privilege to have Ralf and then his team, Centrum Liberale Modernum in Lithuania. Some time ago we were the first here to destroy the Soviet Union. Those are the images of our Tiananmen Square, where Laima was taking, our chairman, Laima Andrikėnė, was taking directly part. She's a signatory of our Independence Act. I was still a young boy standing somewhere there in the crowd. We won, but honestly, for some time we were quite alone in EU and NATO, trying to preach the truth, and nobody was listening. In a way, Ralf was quite alone in Berlin, and I remember the meetings with him, how pleasant it was to meet with him and finally find German that understands. And now it seems that everyone is following what Ralf says in Berlin, and I really hope that events like this will not be just one-day event, it will be a regular format in Vilnius. I really hope, this is my dream, I more or less pray every day that Centrum Liberale Moderne would raise its flag in Vilnius, because honestly we need you. We are now fighting with all autocracies of this planet. Lukashenko, Putin, China hates us. But on the other hand, from positive side, I think we are on the edge of the new world that is opening here and being constructed here. Without Germans, without people like Ralf, without your foundations, we will not be able to do it. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you for bringing those wonderful freedom fighters to Vilnius. And Laima, please make an official opening of our event.
Good morning, everybody, dear Mr. Fuchs, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome you in the Parliament of Lithuania on behalf of its Foreign Affairs Committee. Pleasure to see all of you at this important working meeting of the International Expert Network Russia. And thank you, Mr. Fuchs and Ms. Beck, the Center for Liberal Modernity in Berlin, for taking the lead and organizing this meeting in Vilnius. We all understand that the 24th of February, since the 24th of February, we live in a new reality. And our reality is not Russia's war against Ukraine. Our reality is Russia's war against collective West. It is Russia's war against the world order, liberal world order we have managed to create after the Second World War. For many years, the Baltic states have been whistleblowers, trying to draw the attention, the world's attention to Russia's real intentions and ill perception of the international order. Very few leaders in Europe and the United States were willing to listen to us, wrongly thinking that we are Russophobes or alike. They believe that doing business under the Kremlin umbrella in an autocratic Russia will not only bring economic benefits to Germany, France, or the United States, but will also help to achieve political goals. One of the reasons that this thinking does not work anymore is that the Russian revisionist policy can neither be eliminated by making concessions nor one-sided promises to reset relations. The full-scale military invasion in Ukraine is a proof that we cannot take our security for granted. Russia is not alone in its bloody war. Unlimited friendship and cooperation agreements signed by China and Russia just before Russia started its military aggression, new wave of the military aggression against Ukraine, speaks for itself. Another autocracy, Iran, is providing Russian army with drones, and by doing this is helping Russia to destroy civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. Not to mention some European countries who, by one or another way, are helping Russia to minimize, for instance, the influence of Western sanctions imposed on Russia. Russia has been preparing for a major confrontation with NATO for a long time. Over the years, we witnessed that Russia has used its military aggression against its neighbors, violated international law, and spread instability in Eastern Europe and way beyond. New methods of the so-called borderization and the practice of holding fake referendums in the occupied territories of Georgia and Ukraine became the unstoppable everyday reality and a test for the Western world. In this context, let us not forget Bucharest 2008 also. As we all witness today, the Kremlin employs massive propaganda and disinformation campaigns in its attempt to justify its aggression against Ukraine and to conceal its war crimes and atrocities. Simultaneously, it tries to shift the blame with anti-Western narratives and by reinterpreting the Western sanctions against Russia and support for Ukraine as an alleged involvement in the war against Russia. The lesson we should draw from this experience is that we, the democratic world, must also change and take unprecedented decisive action to change our normal peacetime order. Transatlantic solidarity and unity is key in withstanding autocracies as China and Russia and alike. Since the 24th of February, our parliament, the Seimas, has adopted quite a number of resolutions, 8 so far, on Russia's war against Ukraine. Here, I would like also to mention statements of our committee, like, for instance, on the 4th of March, on the opening of humanitarian corridors in Ukraine and ensuring the protection of these corridors and Ukraine's nuclear facilities. Our Foreign Affairs Committee was active in initiating joint statements of the chairs of the Foreign Affairs Committees of the national parliaments of EU member states, other European countries, and also Foreign Affairs Committees of the US Senate and the Parliament of the United Kingdom. Already now, when I read resolutions adopted by our parliament, I see how this parliament was rethinking Russia, learning its lessons from the ongoing war. And I will mention only a few of them. 24th of February of this year, on aggression of Russia and Belarus against Ukraine. 17th of March, on active measures to ensure the security of the civilian population and critical infrastructure in Ukraine. 12th of April, on condemning the Russian Federation's aggression and war crimes, already war crimes in Ukraine. 10th of May, on recognition of the action of the Russian Federation in Ukraine as genocide and the establishment of a special international criminal tribunal to investigate the crime of Russian aggression. 9th of June, on comprehensive support for Ukraine's victory, accelerated accession to the European Union, and ensuring of safe navigation in the Black Sea. 15th of September, on non-recognition of illegal referendums organized by the Russian Federation in Ukraine, and so on. These resolutions is a footprint, but as I said already, it's a footprint of our rethinking of Russia and a footprint of this parliament, not to mention other activities and actions be initiated. We are working to mobilize the world democracies, also those who so far were not vocal in supporting Ukraine. Solidarity of the world democracies in supporting Ukraine by all means possible, militarily, politically, diplomatically, financially, humanitarian support to Ukraine, also international isolation of Russia, more sanctions on Putin and his regime, establishment of a special international tribunal that those responsible for the crime of aggression should face justice. These should be our tasks in the near future. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I have to stop here. I apologize for not being able to stay for the entire conference, but I wish you a very fruitful and interesting discussion. Thank you.
Dear Madam Andrikiene, dear Sigmantas, Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good morning and welcome to all of you who found their way to Vilnius, and also to those who follow our meeting online. We are very happy to meet so many good friends and partners, and also some new participants who are very welcome. You may already hear that I have some issues with my voice, so I should best keep quiet. But I was looking forward to this meeting too much to stay at home at the last minute. So let's see how long my voice holds out. I will restrict myself today, but there are so many smart and competent speakers worth listening to. This meeting is a continuation of the conferences we have organized in Berlin in recent years under the title Russia and the West. Among many other events, seminars, and online discussions dealing with domestic developments as well as Western policies towards Russia. At the same time, this gathering is a premiere. It is the start of a new project, expanding and deepening our international network of experts on Russia. In the future, we want to meet at least twice a year for a working conference, accompanied by ad hoc meetings on current events. We want to provide a platform for continuous exchange of knowledge from different perspectives, and we will invite all of you to actively take part in these projects. In this way, we want to deepen the European and transatlantic discourse on Russia, contributing to the overdue reorientation of the West's Russia policy. This should not remain a purely academic exercise. Our aim is to combine sound analysis with political recommendations for action addressed to our governments and parliaments. At the same time, interventions in the public debate should also emerge from this circle, be it in the form of articles or joint statements. I guess that each of us feels that Russia's renewed attack on Ukraine marks a historic turning point. This war already has profound implications for international relations far beyond Europe. At stake is not only the future of Ukraine as an independent and democratic country, but the future of the international order. Will international law still apply? We just held an international conference in Berlin, which specifically addressed the question to which extent Russia's warfare meets key criteria of the United Nations Convention to Prevent Genocide. And there is little doubt that it does. At the same time, Ukraine is a litmus test if democracies successfully can defend themselves against the challenge by authoritarian powers. The outcome of this war will determine if the European Union and NATO emerge stronger or if they will plunge into a deep crisis. Everything depends on whether the West summons the determination to support Ukraine on such a massive scale that it can successfully defend its territorial integrity and political sovereignty. This war is also key to Russia's future development. Only a military defeat in Ukraine can open the way for a painful farewell to the demons of Russian imperialism great Russia fantasies, and unrestricted violence. Even those who had no illusions about the character of the Russian regime must rethink their image of Russia in view of the widespread support, or at least the indifference towards this brutal war in the Russian society. This will also be a topic of our conference. Getting clear about Russia is the key for any realistic Russia policy. Before we enter into our first round of discussion, I would like to express my sincere thanks to all those who made this conference possible, especially to the Lithuanian Parliament for its hospitality and political support, namely our friend Zigmantas Paviljonis and his staff. And thank you, Zigmantas, for pushing us constantly to come to Vilnius. Thanks also to the Open Society Foundations and the German Foreign Office for supporting this project. And last but not least, to our Russia team at LibMod, who prepared this conference, especially Masha Sanikova, Daria Tashkinova, and Nikolaus von Twickel for their great job. Thank you very much. And with that, I hand over to my better half, Marie-Louise Beck, long-term member of the German Parliament, one of the most outspoken voices in support of Ukraine, and a dedicated advocate for human rights, who will moderate the first block of our conference. I wish us a productive day with new insights and look forward to further cooperation. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Fortunately, we are a couple, and so we can help each other out. And it sounds to me like once in a while I will have to help you out today, Ralph, listening to your voice. Thank you all for coming. I want to say that myself because I know it's not so easy to get to Vilnius. It takes some time, and there is so many faces where we have been working together already, even in those times maybe where for many governments and media and parliaments it was not so obvious yet which way Russia was going. And it was, in many countries, the minorities who were the ones who said, please have a closer look. And amongst us is the German ambassador who said, I was in Moscow in 2002, 2003. You could understand what was going on, but obviously there was very few who wanted to understand and who wanted to see and who wanted to open their eyes. So now, today, we have to talk about lessons, yes, lessons from the war. Since I did not make the program, I was going to ask you, is it lessons from the 24th, 22, or is it from 2014 maybe? Because that is when the war started. We tend to forget. We have three wonderful speakers. To my left, Jonas Servia. He's Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania. We have in Berlin Tobias Lindner, former colleague of ours, and now still member of parliament, but deputy minister in the foreign ministry. And then you have our good old friend Pavlo, here. Pavlo, yes. He has been he was ambassador in Berlin a long time ago, So again, we know each other for a very long time. Then he was the first foreign minister. Well, you were not the first one, but the first one when we had the feeling now it's really turning west and going west after the Maidan. So I think all three of you now will tell us what you think, what are the lessons of the war. And I don't know how much we have to go back, looking at the mistakes which were being made, which I just said nobody wanted to see. But of course, we also have to look into the future. I don't know whether you poor guys in Ukraine at the moment have time to look into the future, fighting for your existence every day. But we have to prepare. So, Jonas, will you start?
Thank you, Maria-Louise. Dear members of parliament, your excellencies, ambassadors, dear Žygimantas and dear Ralph, who gathered us here, and dear allies, when I was asked to deliver some input and contribute to this great endeavor initiated by Center for Liberal Modernity on the very important topics you will be discussing today, I initially thought that it would be enough just to quote, paraphrase, and a bit reinterpret one great book which I've read this summer. Here it is. Though Ralph Fuchs wrote it back in 2017, an English edition which I've read was published 3 years ago, a lot of observations, assessments of Russia and policy recommendations are still valid today. And if Ralph wouldn't mind, I'll use at least the title of his book to structure my statement. The title is Defending Freedom. Defending Freedom, I think, is the best title to describe what Ukrainians are actually doing since February 24th. Brave and courageous, Ukrainian men and women are fighting and sacrificing themselves in defending their freedom. But not only. They're defending Europe's freedom, defending world's freedom. As I'm sure other dictators and authoritarians from nearby in Belarus, just 40 kilometers, half an hour ride from here, or in Iran, or a bit further in Beijing, are also closely watching at Ukrainians fight and making calculations and adjustments to their own plans and their foreign policy and military strategies. Defending freedom means defending the very principles that European continent security was built upon after the Second World War, and also giving us the possibility to gather here in Vilnius freely and safely, to have an intellectual debate, an exchange of ideas, and not to look for shelter from rockets or drone attacks. So I suggest first to never forget it and be grateful for their courage and sacrifice. Today, Ukraine is the greatest provider and contributor to European security. Дякую Україні. Thank you to Ukraine. And if we paraphrase Ralph's subtitle, How We Can Win the Fight, or as you put on the program, what are the lessons learned from Russia's war against Ukraine, I see 5 major lessons that we can all quickly run through today. First, geopolitics is back. Actually, it has never been away, especially in our region. Just some wanted to think and naively believe that it can be substituted by economy, mutual interdependence, especially in trade and energy relations, epitomized by such popular beliefs in globalization as so-called two McDonald's theory, as no two countries that both have a McDonald's will ever fight a war against each other, as you might remember. So while some in the West wanted to believe in it, Putin proved that he believes only in so-called контактная геополитика, going as far as possible and projecting its power by all means available until it is stopped by another power, ignoring all possible borders, geographical and legal ones, and I would add even human ones, as we see inconceivable examples of genocide-like acts of brutality, torturing and killing Ukrainian civilians, jailing them in filtration camps, kidnapping kids. Now, today, as we speak, in the 21st century, in Europe. Second, stemming from the first, be prepared and ready to confront Putin's Russia in all possible domains, including military, but do not overestimate its power. In other words, learn from Theodore Roosevelt. Speak softly and carry a big stick. You will go far. The big mistake was to overestimate Russian might, especially military one, and underestimate Ukrainians. Though Putin is attacking across all possible domains, militarily on the battlefield, in economy and energy, in informational sphere and cyber, in neither one is he superior or invincible. As soon as Ukrainians were provided with better modern Western artillery systems and ammunition, the tide of war began to shift. Putin's Russia is not the Soviet Union, and it isn't the world's second superpower. Combined Nordic countries' GDP is higher than Russia's. However, even a weakening and losing Russia is a dangerous one and has to be contained. Another lesson could be to learn from the lessons and integrate Ukraine into Euro-Atlantic alliances. Not giving NATO's membership action plans in Bucharest summit to Georgia and Ukraine was a grave mistake. It signaled laissez-faire to Mr. Putin, an aggression and annexation that follows against both countries. We should not repeat the same mistakes. The EU candidate status to Moldova and Ukraine is a great first step in the right direction. Accession negotiations should follow soon. The same should be with NATO. We should not ask anymore whether or if Ukraine will join NATO, but start discussing when and how.
Yeah.
Though I started my statement with a wish to quote Mr. Fuchs, I ended unexpectedly to myself by quoting Federal President Mr. Frank-Walter Steinmeier and his brilliant speech that he delivered 3 days ago. I think some of the passages are worth quoting in full. A strong and well-equipped Bundeswehr, something that is expected by the people of our country, but also by our neighbors and partners. We are the strong country at the heart of Europe. We have a duty to contribute our share to collective defense, today much more than at a time when others, particularly the US, took us under their protection. For a long time, we were able to rely on others, and we can continue to do so, but now others must also be able to rely on us. End of quote. Cannot agree more. We truly need German leadership in Europe. We need and ask a combat-ready German brigade fully deployed here in the Baltics, Lithuania, not back in Germany. And Ukraine, as I know, thankful for Iris and Gepard air defense systems, which are saving the lives of civilians, further asks and needs German Leopards and Marders, together with American Abrams and F-15s. So the fourth lesson is that only credible deterrence and containment can stop Putin. Last but not least, and the second passage from President's speech, a supposed peace that rewards acts like this, a peace that seals Putin's land grabs, is no peace. It would mean a rule of terror for many people in Ukraine, would leave them at the mercy of their Russian occupiers' arbitrary violence. Worse yet, a sham peace like this would only increase Putin's hunger. Moldavia and Georgia, as well as our NATO partners in the Baltic, live in fear. End of quote. This is a very timely speech, especially when Russia unilaterally and under false allegations decided to stop the grain deal. By doing so, it isn't only weaponizing food and hunger, but using it as a pretext to force the UN, the EU, and other international actors to force Ukrainians to broader negotiations with Russia. In their playbook, it is called принуждение к диалогу, forced blackmail dialogue. Only a small correction on the last quote regarding partners in Baltics live in a fear. We do not live in fear in Lithuania. We are not afraid of Russia. We know well whom we have to deal with and that we should be prepared for any kind of scenarios. And we are preparing. But yes, we are worried. We, as a part of the UN NATO, worried for the security of whole Europe, and therefore we are sure that in order to achieve and sustain a long-term peace and security in our continent, Putin and Putinism should be defeated in Ukraine as soon as possible, as Ralph Fuchs also said. So again, we should trust Ukraine and provide her further with more and better weapons. It will save lives of Ukrainians. It will bring victory sooner. We should not be afraid of nuclear blackmail and Putin's chicken game. Continue and strengthen containment in all spheres. Hold Putin accountable for its crimes. Ukrainians are not afraid, so why should we be afraid? And we should not be afraid of Ukrainian victory too. We should less think about Putin's face and more about ours. And finally, in order to contain Putin's Russia, we should first stop self-containment. Do not self-contain. Provide more help to Ukraine. Be brave like Ukraine. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you, Jonas. I think this small country, Lithuania, showing us how brave and decided you can be, is really a lesson we can take back to Germany, and maybe we have the chance to talk about that Steinmeier speech a little bit later on. I'm not quite as positive as you are, but at the moment it's not my job to talk about that. I know, Tobias, that you have to leave a little earlier, but still I think for a German Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, it's good to listen to somebody coming from Ukraine first, because being German, and we both know it, and I know that you know it, we have quite a bit to explain. So, Pavlo, if you would start now, and then we give Tobias the chance to answer and show us that maybe Germany is moving a little bit into a different direction, starting to understand.
Thanks, Marie. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be back in Vilnius. It's a very special feeling to get back among friends. Couple of weeks before the war had started, I had quite a meeting with one of the guys who is now 96 years old and who participated in the uprising in the Stalin camp in Norilsk together with the Lithuanians. And we were drinking kind of strong alcohol, and he was talking about his life, about his Lithuanian friends. He spent 27 years in the camps, was not allowed to get back for many years, and only after the Soviet Union broke down, started enjoying Ukraine again. So thanks a lot, our friends, for standing with Ukraine. I'm not saying it as a slogan. It's something which matters for us. But now I'm gonna map out a couple of tricky points to throw and to probably kind of becoming thought-provoking and not to stay on a sort of normal politically correct narrative. It would be good to have the West with the Lithuanian heart beating. It's not the reality we are in. Just this morning, and I had thousands of phone conversations this morning, we had another missile strikes. we have up to 400,000 people without electricity, and what is even more crazy, without water. You can understand that to live without electricity, in the sense of our tenacity and resilience, is still fine. Without water, is still fine. But my point is very simple. What do you do with all kind of right messages now? And I mean not you personally, but the sense of this collective West. You can write another tweet with all kind of condemnation, and it's not bad. You can start working on getting a bit more for Ukraine, a bit more weapons, but it's not obvious because, Jonas, you were talking about German Gepards. They were, well, let me put it very directly, too slow in the sense of supply. But even now, we need to counter the Russian, or better to say Iranian-Russian drones. For that, these Gepards are quite good, but we need munitions. Germany does not have enough, but we have another country, Western country, it's Switzerland, where we can get definitely more. What is needed, not today, but yesterday, and we've been working now, different teams, on how to squeeze out of them, not weapon, but munition. And they are still referring to their sense of neutrality. And my point, whether we still live in the same understanding of neutrality, whether it's the same kind of conflict, we believe, okay, we have to stay away. And it's my first point. We need to simply understand what to do now with all kind of good strategic discussions. And my point, to do a bit more of the same is definitely not the right answer. A bit more weapons, a bit more financial assistance, and on all of these points, the West as such, as the reality, is too slow. I don't mean, our friends, but as a kind of reality, understanding what is needed. And here is my point. We had so-called Kremlinology in the Soviet time, trying to guess what kind of mentality different Soviet guys in charge actually had. We had a lot of good strategies. We had Kennan, we had, all kind of people coming up with concepts, with collective defense, deterrence, containment. So part of this discussion is, what does it mean now to have containment, collective defense, and deterrence against Russia? These discussions have been started by the Czech presidency. They threw it, so to say, at the stage, but somehow stumbling. The simple point is why. And answering this question, you can go to the core of the problem. The simple point: are you ready, and are you willing to take it up now? And to understand that you were talking about geopolitics, Jonas. To play any geopolitical games is risky. It implies risks and costs. But not to play any geopolitical game is also risky. So the point is, how we gonna wait out? How we gonna balance this risk? And whether is not playing is still an answer. And this question is still in the air. It's not answered. It's probably answered here in this room, but it's not answered by the collective West. There is now sort of definition of collective West after all this hardship of the war, but whether it's sustainable, it's again a big point. And my third point, we had a great discussion yesterday, an intellectual one with you, Marie, with the others. How do we understand Russia now and the Russian regime? Is there any definition? I mean, not in 2 sentences, but still definition what is going on in Russia. Is it autocracy? Yes, but. Is it totalitarian regime? Yes, but. Is it a sort of fascist regime? Yeah, partly, but. So we need to define the beast to understand how to eat it up. Without defining what we are confronting now in real words, without starting this discussion, firstly, probably not publicly, but after that, at the level of politics, people, business, we can't come to a sort of understanding how we're gonna contain this sort of Russia. We missed a lot of chances. I remember very well 2003. I was kind of a humble diplomat this time, and many of you probably don't recall it. The Russians in 2003, Putin was 3 years in his position. The Russians wanted to impose so-called single economic space on us, to create a so-called trilateral gas consortium, but in fact to take over our gas transit system and basically to get Ukraine as a kind of, let's say, it's not exactly a sort of colony in legal terms, but colony in purely political terms. It all collapsed. Why we can discuss further, and we contributed to it. But after that came Tuzla. Maybe you remember it. The Russian attempt to get to the Kerch Straits. And it was exactly the time when I started talking to my friends in the West, and I remember my discussions in Berlin, in Brussels, in DC actually, guys, there's gonna be a war. And people were saying, Pavlo, okay, we like you, you're a smart guy, but it's all overblown. You know, what kind of war? And it's my last point. We lost 19 years from 2003 in the sense of changing our stance, in the sense of executing strategic weakening up of this Russia. We could have taken a completely different approach, and all the recent events would not have happened. And I can explain it with a number of simple points, but now it's my last one. The message, and we are grateful for this message, granting us the candidate status. It's geopolitical one. Never ever any country got candidate status in the state of war. You know, the Western Balkans got it in 2003 in Thessaloniki after the war, and now it's a completely different reality, and it's a sort of geopolitical statement. The biggest point towards Putin, of course, with more weapons and quality, not quantity, of course, with more financial assistance, would be to start working on a sort of clear idea and plan how to get Ukraine into the West. You know, formally and informally, and to show Putin that resilience, not only not to let him win in Ukraine, but to get Ukraine as a part of the West, is fundamental. And it's, for me, the key point we should discuss here. Let me stop here, and after that, and if we have this discussion, I'm going to make a couple of points afterwards. And thanks again for standing with Ukraine. It's not something which is which sounds as a mere platitude now.
Thank you, Pavel. I remember a meeting of the French and the German foreign committees, must have been something like 2015-16, and I was really surprised that almost most of French parliamentarians, no matter which party they belong to, said we shouldn't have started that whole deal with the association treaty in the first place, because it was totally clear that we would provoke Russia. So I just think about that when you say you really must be decided that Ukraine must be part of the West. Tobias, I have to say that first. You thankfully belong to a party which has been the most critical within German parliament, and it is no secret that the foreign ministry has a slight or even bigger difference with the chancellor's office. So I don't know how far you can go being open about those differences, but you now heard it's about defending freedom. We all know that neither Steinmeier nor Chancellor Scholz said Putin must lose this war. They say we support Ukraine as long as it is needed, not really then explaining what that really means. So you now listen to two very decided voices, and what does and can a German deputy foreign minister add and say to the comment on that?
Marie-Louise, dear Ralph, colleagues, excellencies, friends, all protocols observed. I cannot count you all on the screen. Thank you very much for that invitation to that very important conference. And I have to start with two regrets. First of all, I cannot be with you in person due to other commitments today here in Berlin. That's also the reason why I have to leave in 20 to 25 minutes. Second, as you know, in my capacity as deputy foreign minister, I cannot make any comments on internal discussions of the German government too, and I think you understand it. I would have very much welcomed the opportunity to exchange views and to connect with you in person, and I hope for another occasion. Ladies and gentlemen, the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine marks a turning point in many ways. It's a war in Ukraine, but it goes beyond Ukraine. The world is no longer the same, with severe consequences for our European security, and this is a fact we all have to face. The core question is, how can we muster the strength to set limits to warmongers like Putin? And I'm convinced the answer is quite simple. Our unity is our strength. This is at least what the last months have shown in the European Union, in the G7, and in NATO. We stood firmly united, maybe more so than ever in recent decades, to be honest. United in providing a resolute response in NATO on the alliance eastern flank, especially in the Baltic countries, a massive support to Ukraine as allies, as EU and G7 members, and in imposing unprecedented sanctions on Russia, sanctions which many in Russia couldn't believe before February 24th. That unity surprised many, not least Vladimir Putin, surely, but no one should be surprised that we firmly commit to keeping it up. Only together we can counter Russia's attempts to divide and to threaten us. And when talking about European security, this is what we need to keep in mind. Apart from our firm unity in the face of this horrendous war, I would like to mention another aspect very important to me. Especially us in Germany, we have to truly live up to the Zeitenwende we have committed ourselves in March of this year. The government has decided to allocate enormous amounts of money to equipping and strengthening our armed forces. That's good, but surely that's not enough. We also need to exercise Zeitenwende in our foreign policy approach vis-à-vis Russia. In the past, we have been naive, and this naivety to hope of a partnership, at least of some in German politics, to hope of a partnership with Putin, fed by a Russia-focused sense of historical responsibility, must end. Firstly, our historical responsibility vis-à-vis Ukraine is just as important. Secondly, exactly our historical responsibility now forces us to draw a very clear front against the warmonger Putin. I would like to focus on 3 points that affect our European security. First, military adaptation. Second, support for Ukraine. And third, economic and energy dependency. So let me start with the military adaptation. The Russian war of aggression against Ukraine has made us painfully aware that we must also stand ready to defend our own security and our own freedom and the security and freedom of our allies militarily. Germany is not an island. We ourselves are dependent on allies for our own defense, just as other allies depend on us. We will tackle our deficits and strengthen our military capabilities as an alliance of collective defense, not only in the East, but in a 360-degree approach. As a country located in the middle of Europe, we are ready to assume responsibility and to do our part in continuing to strengthen our European and transatlantic systems of collective security. The Russian aggression is a threat for all of us in Europe. For our Eastern European allies, even more, so an existential one. Especially Central and Eastern European countries have been key in how the European Union and NATO have and are shifting gear to counter the Russian threat now and in the future. All of this is also reflected in the decisions of the Madrid summit, which mark first elements of a new security architecture in Europe, especially in NATO. The forthcoming NATO accession of Finland and Sweden will further strengthen the alliance, will crucially make the Baltic Sea better protected. We continue to work closely together to enhance deterrence and defense against the Russian threat. For Germany, this means we are helping to strengthen NATO's eastern defenses with Eurofighters for air policing in Estonia, with Patriot systems for air defense in Slovakia, and we are preparing our first combat-ready brigade for the defense of Lithuania in the case of need, in addition to the enhanced forward presence battle group in Rukla. As an alliance, we will defend every square inch of NATO's territory. All of this is shaping European security. Second, our support to Ukraine. My minister said it, and I'm proud to repeat it. Russia shall not win this war. Ukraine will win this war. And the Ukrainian victory, ladies and gentlemen, means that this war comes to an end under conditions that are set in Kiev and not in Moscow. That means Ukrainian victory. And it also implies that it's the sovereign right of the Ukrainian people and their government to define which conditions these are. Germany will keep up the support of Ukraine in its self-defense against the Russian war of aggression and in the reconstruction of the country. We have increased our military supplies with howitzers, multiple rocket launchers, anti-aircraft gun tanks, the Gepard, and the recent delivery of the IRIS-T air defense system, a system we even don't have in our own military. And I can assure you we are preparing to deliver more of it, as Chancellor Scholz announced, worth over 600 million euros, including state-of-the-art weapons, air defense, radar systems, as well as reconnaissance drones. And we continue to discuss, also with our partners, what could be done more. We also support Ukraine financially, as well as in cyber defense, demining, reconstruction work with humanitarian aid, and in ensuring accountability for Russian war crimes committed on Ukrainian soil. The debate on how best to ensure this accountability is still going on nationally and with our partners. And ladies and gentlemen, we stand together and coordinate closely on how we can support Ukraine more effectively and in the long run, as reaffirmed recently in Berlin at a conference for reconstruction, recovery and modernization with G7 partners, the EU and international experts. With our partners in Ukraine, the European Union and the G7, we aim at establishing an effective and inclusive platform to coordinate recovery efforts by international partners. If done well, the reconstruction offers a chance for a progress in the EU accession process, modernization, ecological transition, and necessary reforms can go hand in hand with the reconstruction of the country. In the meantime, Germany will support Ukraine in early recovery, particularly in providing assistance to Ukraine in withstanding the winter, supporting civil society in enduring the war and its consequences, as well as supporting efforts in humanitarian demining as a major precondition for the recovery efforts to come. Together, we will stand with Ukraine for as long as it is necessary. Certain last economic and energy dependencies. The unprecedented EU and G7 sanctions packages against Russia are showing significant effects on the Russian economy. Their impact will increase significantly over time, and it is crucial that we continue to maintain and to expand economic pressure on Russia by adding additional measures and by closing remaining loopholes. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, sanctions can pose challenges for our own economies as well, but let's be clear. Their impact on the Russian economy outweighs the costs we incur ourselves many times over. And sanctions remain an essential tool to increase the price Russia has to pay for its brutal war of aggression. This is something we have to communicate actively in order to counter fake news and disinformation that target our unity. We have also to reach out to countries that sit on the fence when it comes to taking a clear stance on Russia's blatant breach of international law. And another point that has a direct impact on European security is that Russia inherently uses energy as a geopolitical weapon. We must therefore not only ensure energy security in short term and reduce Russia's energy imports, but also push energy transition as a security policy imperative. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to stay united, it is important to keep up the dialogue and to exchange perspectives. And if I'm convinced of anything, then it is that we will prevail if we can keep our unity concerning European security. I thank you and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much. We are all, here's a lot of well-knowing people in this room, and I think it's good to open the discussion right away. Please put up your little signs, your name signs. Otherwise, we will take over here. But I want to give you the chance to either squeeze somebody or point out something or... Yeah. You want to start? Okay, put up your sign. Well, I saw you, it's fine.
Just,
anybody else? Like I said, this is...
So, just a question maybe to our, to Honorable Speaker, Minister of State of Federal Foreign Office, Tobias Linder. So, we just heard a call to start accession negotiations with Ukraine next year. Because this, for me, means supporting them by deeds, not by words only. And another call I heard to extend NATO membership. Like we all remember in the Baltics, it was German Defense Minister Ruhe to help us do it some time ago. And we have NATO Vilnius summit coming. and we will need German backing. So just few questions to you, Dr. Tobias, would you be able to answer?
You go ahead, Tobias.
Yes, sure, I can go ahead. Thank you for those questions. First of all, on the EU accession, we very much welcome here in Germany that Ukraine, by themselves, they do want to have it fast, but not in sense of a fast track or a discount approach to the European Union. Ukrainian authorities have made very clear that they want to fulfill all the conditions needed to be a full member of the European Union. They want to do it quick, they want to do it sure. And I can tell you from my conversations I had on that issue with Ukrainian ministers, for example, I'm convinced that's not advertisement or something. The Ukrainians are really, really committed to be a full and equal member of the European Union. And now, the speed of the accession is in the hand of the Ukrainians to do some reforms and to fulfill some of the conditions that are coming with the candidate status, for sure. But I can also assure you we are willing to support Ukraine. Chancellor Scholz again made it very clear that Ukraine's place is inside the European Union as a full member. And therefore, we are advocating that we are using the need for reconstruction of the country in the same time as a mechanism to modernize this country, to help the Ukrainians to get quickly and fast inside the European Union. Because we have to spend the money anyhow, so let's spend it well and let's use it for a modernization of the economy, of the administration, to help the Ukrainians, to support them in getting an EU member. On NATO, I have to be honest with you. You know, my party was in opposition for almost 16 years now. I'm convinced mistakes had been made in 2008. And politicians all over in NATO have to ask themselves, what if in 2008 we would have decided differently? Or what if in 2014, when the war started, let's be honest, what if at that time we would have provided Ukraine with military support? This is what comes into my mind when I cannot sleep at night. I have to be honest with you, for me it's a little bit comfortable because at that time my party was in opposition. I believe that's the real issue. And we know from the days after February 24th that for sure talks with Ukraine about the end of this war are closely linked to security guarantees. And I think everyone in this room knows that those security guarantees must significantly go beyond the Budapest Memorandum, because the Budapest Memorandum has been proven to be weak. That's my comment on NATO.
Marie. Thank you, Tobias. Is the micro on?
Sorry.
I think the translators can't work without a micro. Yeah.
I have a question for Pavlo Klimkin. First, you mentioned, I think very rightly, that it all goes back to the early years of the 2000s, 2003. And I'd like to stress this, because we around this table were quite a few writing that these men who came to power because he waged a second Chechen war and went for terrorist attacks in Moscow. So to this day, it is very difficult for me to come to terms to what my compatriots, what most Europeans, Americans didn't want to see. So when you say, how should we define this regime, it's very clear to me. It is a dictatorship that is at war with us and also with its own population. I think as of today, I don't see any better definition. but if you have one, but I think we can go for that definition. I also agree with your point about neutrality. It's just impossible to continue and use a term that is inherited from the past, and a past that is no longer there, and also a past that was not too convincing in the way it used neutrality. Which is why I'd like to have your opinion on this term that I really do not like, which is collective West. And by the way, has been sort of imposed on us by Putin with his sort of devil and that's because this idea that it's the West, first it goes against our fight against neutrality. You know, it's as if you had the West and the devil, you know, and the rest. So I will discuss this a little more in detail when I speak at this afternoon in another panel. But let's discard this term of collective West defending freedom. It's not working in many parts of the world. It's certainly not working in France, and I'll explain why. So I'd like to have your opinion on this. And second question is about the Belarusians. We've all been very concerned that Putin has been trying to save several dictators, and one of them is Lukashenko. He is trying also to bring the war to the territory of Belarus. We should be, I think, very attentive to this. What do you advise us to do?
Knowing that Tobias practically now has to left, I see Andreas Kubilius sign up. If you want to talk to Tobias, then I would say that you answer afterwards to Marie. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So the last chance for Tobias.
I will try to put very briefly a very simple question. Since we are talking about rethinking Russia, and I see Pablo first of all, but of course also Tobias and Jonas. You know, well, definitely we believe, and I am absolutely sure that Ukraine will win the war with Western help. The question is not about Ukraine. I see the Ukrainian future very clearly, you know, Ukrainian success, integration towards EU, NATO. I hope that NATO will be prudent also. The question is about Russia, rethinking Russia. And you know, in all our discussions, I see very clearly there are believers in possibility of Russia becoming democracy and not waging new wars. There are non-believers who think that, you know, Russia forever will stay as it is, you know, imperial, waging new wars, or it will collapse in general, you know. So my question to all the speakers, where are you standing? Among believers, non-believers, or, you know, or in general, you know, going as it is, you know?
Well,
Marie,
yes,
if I may
can't
start.
judge over the topics which are brought up here. Being the mediator, you go ahead, Tobias, and then it's your turn.
Marie, if I may start, since time is running, the usual answer I would give in such a case is I'm a state minister and not a believer or not a magician who could look into the future, to be honest. But to give you a serious answer, you know, we want to hold Russia accountable for what they did and what they are doing in Ukraine. Second, we want to force them that they need to stick to the international rules-based order. If a regime change in Russia will happen or not, and how a Russia after Putin will look like, honestly, I don't know. So my answer would be, we have to be prepared and we should do everything, especially when it comes to the defense posture of NATO, that we have to guarantee security in Europe, not with Russia, but against Russia in the future, maybe in the next decades. It would be good for all of us if we are surprised and Russia becomes a Western liberal democracy at some point. This is nothing which I would hinder or where I would make pressure against it. But we need to be prepared that Russian policies might stay the same for the next decades, even since they will lose the war in Ukraine. And this has serious implications for our defense posture at the eastern flank, for our defense expenditures, how we treat Russia in international organizations like the United Nations, and so on and so forth. I can only tell people also in German politics who wish to go back to a status quo ante after the Russian war in Ukraine, guys, this is wrong. Some of those guys believed after Minsk and after 2014 that you could return to a status quo ante with Russia. And honestly, that was one of the big mistakes also in German politics. So let's be prepared for the worst case and not for believing that history might turn to the good side. I thank you very much for listening to me. I wish you a fruitful and constructive conference, and I hope to see you all soon again in person. And thanks again for your understanding that I have to be virtual with you on this morning. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Tobias. And if I may give you a little hint, this accountability is something we want to see a little more from the German government, because at the moment it is very holding quite a bit back on that question. Okay. So, you guys, here it's your turn. I was just told not everybody has a sign with its name on it, so just lift your hand if you want to speak.
Okay, let me start. A number of great points. Just shortly to follow up on the EU and NATO. It's not about any sort of discounts, whether it's geopolitical discounts. Otherwise, we're going to get into sort of EU fragmentations. But it's about understanding that our accession would be and should be unique. We are a big country. We are the first really post-Soviet country, because I don't believe, that Lithuania it's a classical post-Soviet country. To get out of this reality, we are in the state of war, and the EU simply can't. And it's my conviction. It's not my sense of judgment. It's my conviction. And I wrote a number of pieces of that, also for the European Commission, that the approach towards our accession should be fundamentally different. Not in the sense of discounts, but in the sense of process. And it's also not about recovery, it's about transformation. It's a unique chance to transform Ukraine as such, and it should be transformative also for wider area. Whether it's going to be transformative for Russia, it's an issue I want to discuss in a different way. So fundamentally, it's about completely different approach to our accession, and basically it's two parts of the coins, accession and transformation. On NATO, I fundamentally disagree. A couple of months ago, I started talking to my friends in the DC, and I told them, look, the best security guarantee, if you are not ready to go on with NATO, is to put our friends on the territory of Ukraine, in the sense of military component. They went nuts and said, again, Pavlo, with your ideas. But a couple of weeks ago, they asked me, okay, what do you mean after that? So it's a very, very rapidly developing point. 6 months ago in Berlin, when we started discussing Gephardt and Marder and Fuchs, it was kind of crazy. But it's the whole reality in progress. And many people coming up with this platitude saying we are not gonna get back to a sort of normality, but psychologically in their core, they want to get to normality. It's over. It's really my point. We are not gonna come with these questions. I very much like your point about Russia, but there is one point I fundamentally disagree. In Russia, they keep saying Putin is Russia, Russia is Putin, you know. It's the Russian regime and the nature of the Russian regime is far deeper. It's the sense of the Russian DNA and one point which came clear out of this war. Ukraine is Europe and Russia is not Europe. It's a perceptual point. And what we need from this discussion is to make a policy out of this perception. A policy, a real tough policy with this sort of strategy behind it. And I'm not saying any sort of democratic reality is not possible in Russia in some moment in time. I'm not saying this, all the Russians are evil, don't get me wrong. But I don't believe that this regime is in war with this population. There is this fundamental support of many, many people in Russia for this regime. The nature of this regime is not just about Putin, it's not just about people around him who are serving in the famous Russian. The Russian model is medieval. It's still a kind of Tsar, people who serve, people who are, who are businessmen, and everybody else. And this system is fundamentally non-European. On this point, in a kind of crazy sense, I agree with Putin. Russia is non-European. You can have non-European democracy. You can have democracy in Japan or India, but you can't have European democracy in Russia. It's my point. Many of my friends here probably disagree, but I wrote a lot about it, and I believe we need to get a policy out of this simple point. Ukraine is Russia. Ukraine is Europe, and Russia, sorry, it's Freud, yes. It's Freud, and Russia is not Europe.
That will be the issue of the next panel.
Yeah, a bit of psychology is important. And your last one about Belarus. Putin believes, and we know it from many sources, also directly from all these points, that actually Belarusians and us are kind of wrong Russians. Belarusians are wrong Russians but loyal, and Ukrainians are wrong Russians but not loyal. It's basically his understanding of reality. If you read his article about Ukrainian history, it's a very smart manipulation, actually. If you don't know, if you don't follow all this history, it's a very smart manipulation. And now the whole point of Ukraine carved out of his world and got into a different reality, fundamentally destroying the whole ideological basis for this Russia. Because in the sense of pure security, if we are talking about containment, if we are talking about deterrence, why Ukrainian NATO membership is more dangerous than Finnish NATO membership? In the sense of all these perimeters, in the sense of pure security, it's nuts. But in the sense of internal ideology, it's really big. And the point where the West, whether it's, I don't believe in collective West. We can discuss it separately. It's my fundamental point. I don't believe in a collective West. But it's now the point for the 21st century. For me, it's the issue, a sort of trigger. It's a point whether the West is credible or not credible, not towards Russia, but towards China, towards everybody else, in the sense of saying, now the whole ideology of this West, not West, Europe, not Europe, Russia, not Russia, is broken. The whole lines are broken. And it's my last point. You know, I'm a politician, but many years ago I was a normal, humble physicist, and I've been told a simple story by my professor about Einstein teaching in the Zurich University, and he distributed different tasks for the exam in physics. And one student said, "But professor, these are the same tasks you gave us 2 years ago." And Einstein said, "Fine, but the answers are different." I sincerely believe the answers are different. We can't come up with the same set of answers for the future reality. And for me, it's about NATO, it's about EU, it's about Ukraine as a part of the West, and it's about locating a Western military component as the best security guarantee for us, for the West, and actually for Russia, not for Putin, but for the future Russia. And it's the point we need to discuss. I started talking about it with some of my friends, but again, so far they are going nuts, but not anymore.
Yes, go ahead.
Maybe just briefly answering Andrew's question on this, on the scale of believers and non-believers. And as I see many, not many, but at least few freedom fighters here in this room fighting for freedom and democracy in Russia, I would like to be a believer in Russian democracy, but we need some certain conditions. So first of all, we should defeat Putin, but not only him, but we have to defeat Putinism, deputinize the system. Because this is not only about him, it's about the regime he created, kleptocratic, aggressive. And it's not only important to fight the one that is on the top, but the whole system must be changed in order that democracy might grow.
Thank you. I remember working in Parliament with Russian help and friends, and the German government's explanation on Russia was always, well, don't talk about Putin so much. Russians need a strong hand like Putin. And we answered them, that's a very arrogant and colonial view on Russia coming from Germany, which is another little joke, you know. We answered, but how? Who gives you the right to say that this country and the people will never change? But I think when you look at it and how long this tradition of authoritarian system, no middle class, no bourgeois in an intellectual sense, in a broader way, a little civil society, now it had to flee to the West, you know, pessimism, or at least thinking in terms of generations, is maybe very realistic. You want to add? Yes, Sergei?
That's still the round of questions, right? I'm interrupting the final statements.
Okay, well, I was about to conclude.
Okay, then I will.
Okay,
I will do that.
because then on this question of security, and it was our task was to talk about consequences for European security. You mentioned the Steinmeier talk 3 days ago. Yes, I think which was really a big step, that he finally said Russian is our opponent. And what we have been doing, or what I have been doing for 20 years, believing that by commerce and dialogue and so on, they could finally become and eventually become our partner, which you could negotiate with. This is over. That is a lot. I think part number 2 would be to go into its own history and really be critical where the mistakes have been made. And Marie just said 2003. But what he did not say, and I know and I'm thankful that Tobias said it and our foreign minister says it, and the opposition says it, Putin has to lose that war. And our government and also Steinmeier, they still say, we stand at Ukraine's side. We don't want Putin to win the war, but they don't say he must lose the war. And they don't say we will do everything, especially militarily, that they can lose that war. And I think, so this is again consequences for European security. We are not at the point yet where this fight of the Ukrainian people is seen as our fight. And I think this is the mere point, and it is for the future. And when for a long time German politics was not sending weapons into regions of crisis, and NATO says no members who have a conflict within their own borders, I think both those sayings have to be thought over again, and this is, like you said, certainly about NATO also, not only EU. So, can we close here? You have time for a coffee, I think?
No.
No time for a coffee? Oh! Okay.
Too generous. We have a very
Thank you
tight...
very much.
Thank you very much, Marie, and to the panelists.